Next presenter will be Scott Zabel. You know, for several years, Scott's been working on aviation effectiveness research. What's the best use? How do we choose? And all that goes on to that. And so I'd like to, you know, give Scott the opportunity. He'll be giving us an update on the research he's done and also a demonstration on how to use the tools he's created. And at some point here, when he's done with this, he'll have it published so we can all use it, and I'll let him share how that's going to happen. But he's been serving the mission aviation community for a while now. He's a member of Interlink Ministries and lives near Jars. Following college, he was an airlift operations officer in the Air Force, where he planned and ran airlift operations in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Following almost 10 years in the service, he obtained his graduate degrees and became a geography professor. In 2005, he left academia and began working in missions full-time. He's traveled to 47 countries, conducted field research in 29. So Scott's had the opportunity to be around. So Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we've got you for the next hour. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from my home here in Waxhaw, North Carolina. Great to be with you. I appreciate this opportunity to once again tell you about the aviation effectiveness research. And I'm hoping that you'll be very encouraged at the progress that we're making. So let me share my screen now, and then we'll proceed. Okay, Mike, do you have my screen?
No, not yet.
Let's see. Yep. Do you have my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me do this.
Okay, now, yep, now it's come up. It's not in full presenter mode yet.
Yep, there we
and
go.
Also your video is off.
Yep, that's fine. As long as you can see my full screen, that's what I'm going to care about.
Okay.
Okay, what I'd like to do this afternoon is I'd like to give you a demonstration of just one way of how to use the aviation effectiveness research. And while I'm doing that, to give you an update on the project. For those, okay, and we're having, for some reason, it will not advance. Let's try. All right, there we go. All right, for those of you not familiar with the aviation effectiveness research, the purpose of the research is to obtain an adequate understanding of the effectiveness of aviation at advancing people's work. In other words, we want to get a really firm handle on exactly what a flying machine does for somebody. And the reason that we want to do that is because we want to enable decision makers to do three things. First, to make knowledgeable decisions about when, where, and for whom to use or not use aviation worldwide. Think of this in terms of, where do you start a new flight program? Where do you not start a flight program? When do you use surface transport? How do you reshape a flight program to make it more effective? And those types of questions. Secondly, once you can make a sound, knowledgeable decision about the use of aviation, then you can align your organizational resources to accomplish kingdom goals. And then thirdly, once you make that sound decision, then you can inform and educate and communicate about those decisions. And you can communicate to your parent organization. You can communicate to your board. You can communicate to your donors. You can communicate to your public. So the bottom line to the AER is stewardship. You know, aircraft are some of the most expensive assets in the kingdom, and we are required to use them well in the service of the king. And the AER is designed to help us do exactly that. Now, from the beginning, the AER it's a JARS initiative that's intended to benefit the greater mission aviation community. And so, although JARS has provided the majority of the funding for it, these other organizations and individuals have provided some pretty notable checks to help make this happen. And not only that, but I received practical field support when I went overseas to do the field research. These organizations also saw the value and worth of the research and lent their time and their people and their resources to make it happen. So these groups, what they enabled me to do was to interview 324 air service users around the world in the road, river, ocean, trail, and no-mode transportation contexts. So we have God has given us a very rich and robust data set, and it's these organizations that made it happen overseas, for which we are very grateful. So I show this to you not only to say thank you publicly to them, but also so that you can see that the AER is much bigger than just JARS. Now, JARS has been promising to share the findings of the AER with the mission aviation community. That has been the goal all along, and they have put their money where their mouth is. So I am currently in the process of designing, working with a gentleman in South Carolina to design and build a new portion of the IAMA website. It's kind of like the AER website, a website within a website. So it'll be on the IAMA website. And what we're designing is we want to give you an interactive tool set that you can use. You'll be able to make many types of custom queries to very quickly and easily and hopefully intuitively get at the information that you seek. The material will be downloadable. So if you see a graph, for instance, that you would like to have, you can download it. You can use it in your PowerPoints. You can put it on your website. You can put it in your newsletters. You can use all of the material that you wish. So everything will be downloadable. And we want you to think of this as a resource that you can use to communicate, to inform, and to educate people about your organization's use of aviation. So think of it as a community resource. Now on the website, you're going to find all kinds of things, and I'm going to show you some examples of these in our demonstration this afternoon. You're also going to find reasons to use surface transport, a whole section on that, because aviation is not the answer to everything. You'll find answers to the 2 exploratory questions about how does aviation help organizations accomplish their goals? Well, we know the specific ways that it does that. Does aviation impact the kingdom of God? Well, we also know the answer to all of the ways that it does so. We're also going to put over 1,000 respondent statements, the gold nugget statements that put the human side to this travel experience, human side to the numbers. You'll find a time saved calculator, a strengths maximization index tool, and I'll explain those 2 and show those to you in our demonstration. Now, we've just begun the design phase of this website, or maybe I should say the AER portion of the IAMA website, and it's going to take us a number of months to design, build, and test it. But when it is ready for you, we will let you know through the standard IAMA channels. Now, if you recall, JARS has commissioned the AER. They had the vision and the foresight and saw the value of this early on. They also used their relationships and their reputation and their good offices around the world to enable me to travel to some pretty remote areas to collect this rich and robust data set. They've also provided the majority of the funding. And they are also making it available to the mission aviation community. Why is that? Because when I talk with Woody McClendon, who is the president of JARS, and with Craig Russell, who is the vice president for transportation, these gentlemen want to see the mission aviation community work together well in fulfilling the Great Commission. They greatly value collaboration and partnership and teamwork in the mission aviation arena. And so they see the AER not only as a practical manifestation of those values, but they also see the AER as a common resource that gives us common data, common information that we all can use when we are working together to use aviation well around the world. So we're designing and building this website, and JARS has committed to funding this website, and I can tell you that it is not going to be particularly cheap. But if you would like to help financially contribute to this, please contact Craig Russell. You can also contact myself, and JARS would certainly appreciate the financial assistance. All right, so let's get into our demonstration here. First, a couple of caveats. First of all, I'm obviously going to have to simplify the complexities of reality to do a demonstration in just 50 minutes. So please, I would ask that you give me a little bit of grace in that. Second, you can do many things with the aviation effectiveness research. I am only going to demonstrate one of them. So please keep that in mind. There's many, many things you can do with the information that we are going to post on the IAMA website. Third, keep in mind that the AER is meant to help frame decisions about aviation use. It will not make the decision for you, okay? So it's meant to frame the decision. And for our case study this afternoon, we're going to use the Central African Republic. It's a great case study for several reasons. First of all, it is a road context. And a lot of people think, oh, because you have roads, you don't necessarily need aircraft. They might not be effective. Well, we'll see what the data say about that. They have a very challenging security situation in the country. The Bible translation movement there is actually a national effort. It's being led and staffed by nationals, with expatriates being in a supportive role. And this, of course, is the trend of the new paradigm in missions worldwide. And of course, they have very poor infrastructure in CAR. And so it's a very challenging place. So it makes a great test, if you will, for the AER. All right, so when you're going to be making a decision, especially one of any consequence, you need to know exactly what the question is that you need to answer. What's the decision that you need to make specifically? So for our purposes this afternoon, what is the appropriate transportation solution to advance Bible translation in the CAR? Well, let me just pause right here and tell you one of the neat things about the AER. It can be used by any organization that's using aircraft to advance people's work. The AER is not JAR-centric, it's not Bible translation-centric. It can be used by any group using aircraft to advance people's kingdom work. So what would be the potential dollar amount involved? Well, let's just say for our discussion, $3 million. If you buy 2 used turbine aircraft, you can go through $3 million in a hurry. And what are your options? Okay, again, you're a decision maker and you've got a lot of choices before you. You could use just aircraft that are based in the CAR. You could use only vehicles that are based in country. You could use both aircraft and vehicles located in the country. Or don't forget, you could use remote air support from Cameroon because SIL has a Cessna 206, a Saloy 207, and an R66 based in Yaoundé. Or you could use remote air support plus in-country vehicles. All right, so this gets a little bit complicated, doesn't it? But that's okay. Now, what I would like you to do, wherever you are in the world today, I would like you to just write down what option is the correct one? Which one do you think is the best transportation solution to advance Bible translation in CAR? Just with what you know right now, at this moment, what option would you pick? And then I'd like you to write down, how confident are you? Are you 10% sure you're right? Are you 40% sure you're right? 80% sure you're right? Remember, it's a $3 million decision. And then as we go through our demonstration, we're going to come back to this slide at the end, and we're going to see if the AER, if the information and the tools that we've developed, we're going to see if that's helped you to make a better decision and to be more confident in that decision. Okay, so we'll come back to this at the end. All right, a little bit about the CAR. It is no surprise, it is located in Central Africa. Its capital is Bangui, and its neighbors to the west are Cameroon, and to the north is Chad, to the east is South Sudan, and to the south is the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the southwest would be the Republic of Congo. It is a very, shall we say, challenging and difficult neighborhood. When I was in Cameroon in 2015, one of my jobs was to interview people who worked in Central African Republic, and they told me about 10 Bible translation projects that were underway at that time. I have a colleague who went to Central African Republic in January of this year, and he says now that they have plans for 50 Bible translation projects. So to give you a little bit of feel of the real estate involved, this is the Central African Republic. You can see it covers quite a bit of territory because in Africa, of course, you have to respect the distances. And one day's drive, just to give you a feel, when I drive from Charlotte up to Oshkosh every year, except of course for this year, I can make it to Indianapolis in about 1 10-hour day. A man I interviewed said he can get from Berberati to Bangui in 1 day. Again, just to give you a feel for the real estate. Okay, a little bit of information about the country. In that territory, they have a grand total of 435 miles of paved roads. So only about 3% of the total road structure is paved. And the other 97% is very, very rough, shall we say, and turns to mud in the rainy season. And they are, when it comes to the Human Development Index, they are at the bottom of the barrel, literally, right between Niger and Somalia. And in 2012, Muslim rebels overran from the east and the north, and they descended into a very nasty civil war. And currently, they have a transitional government. The United Nations is there, and the French forces are there. So it's a very unstable and precarious situation at the moment. So for our scenario this afternoon, let's just set some parameters, again, for demonstration purposes. Let's say that the situation is stable enough that you could base aircraft in the capital. Let's say that nationals can travel by surface. But let's consider, say, our high threat for expatriates. And I learned about high threat environment when I did the field research in Niger. And I learned that it's a geographic area where bad actors put the safety and security of people and cargo at unacceptably high risk. Let me translate that for you. That means if you're an expatriate and you're out there driving around in CAR, you can fully expect that you'll get carjacked, raped, kidnapped, or killed. And of course, there are numerous places in Africa where that is indeed the case. But we're just going to set this up for our scenario this afternoon. Okay, so let's say that you are considering whether or not to start a flight program in the Central African Republic or in any other part of the world. There are some foundational steps here, and we'll show you where the AER fits. So as you start this process, the first thing you have to do is you have to determine what's the purpose of that program. God is purposeful, we need to be purposeful. Now, to give you an example, in the world of JARS, JARS uses aviation to advance the work of people doing Bible translation and language development. But again, the AER is great because you can use it for any organization that's using aircraft to advance people's work, whether that be church planting, whether it be medical work, whether it be community development, it doesn't matter. But as long as you are very clear on what your purpose of using aircraft is. Then you would need to go to the IAMA website to avail yourself of the AER findings and learn what's there. And then let me introduce this. This is called a requisite transport assessment, an RTA. This is something that has come out of the AER as I was doing the analysis. We found that if you're going to think about starting a new flight program someplace, you have to know what the required transport is. Now, requisite transport assessment is simply an inventory of who has to go where, how often, carrying what. So what I did was I went through all 1,300 pages of my findings, and I combed through and I identified about 34 variables that determine aviation's benefit. And so I created then the requisite transport assessment. And so these 4 categories, who has to go where, how often, carrying what, and we are going to get into that in just a moment. So then what you do is you put those 3 things together, and then you can determine the nature and shape of your transportation program. You can determine if it's an aviation program or if it should be land or water program. You can, if it's aircraft, then you figure out what kind of aircraft to use, how many, where would they be based, who would you serve, what locations would you fly to, how many people would you need, so on and so forth. And then the flow chart goes up from here. And we will put the flow chart, we'll have a page for requisite transport assessment on the website with the complete flow chart, another tool that JARS is making available for your use. Okay, so we're going to get into that right now about who has to go where, how often, carrying what, but just a word of preface. And the upper left of each slide, you're going to see something that looks like this. This is not mechanics. This is axioms and principles. An axiom is a statement of something regarded as true, and a principle is the application of that principle. And there'll be 553 of those in the AER, but I'm only going to give you 1 for each variable this afternoon in the interest of time. So one of the first things we need to know if we're considering starting a flight program someplace is who are the travelers going to be? And in our case, in the CAR, the vast majority of the travelers are going to be translators. There will be a few consultants, a few project managers, and a few country leaders, but by and large, they are going to be line translators. So one of the applicable axioms is that aviation is more beneficial for people with jobs having high travel requirements than those with jobs having low travel requirements. In other words, people that have to travel a lot every year, make many trips per year. They make trips in close succession. They make trips with very short stays. They have to travel to very distant parts of the country. They have high travel requirements. And so we look at the translators and they go, no, probably not. Consultants, managers, country leaders, yeah, they probably will. And so on this variable, probably you're going to need both air and surface transport. Now, let me pause here for a moment. When it comes to axioms and for any other finding in the AER, let me tell you that every finding in the AER comes from data. I've gone through in a very systematic and standardized way to find each of these axioms. So I can, if you say, hey, Scott, where did you get that from? I can take you back, click, click, click. I can tell you exactly who said it. I can tell you what context it came from. I can tell you how many people said it. And everything in the AER is based on data. Okay, second thing that we need to know from our requisite transport assessment is, are they going to be nationals or expats? Well, in this case, it's going to be mostly nationals with a few expats. And I learned something, this was kind of an interesting thing that came out of the research. People traversing territory in which they are considered outsiders benefit more from aviation than insiders, especially in non-secure areas. And so obviously the nationals will be insiders, the expats will be outsiders, and so you're going to need both. And so it really doesn't matter what the nationality is. It doesn't matter what passport you carry. What matters is if people regard you as a cultural outsider. So it's not a case of national and expat, or it's a matter of insider, outsider. Men or women? Well, most of the travelers by far are going to be male. And we know that female travelers, particularly those traveling unaccompanied, benefit more from aviation than male travelers. And by the way, there's a tremendous amount of data on this particular axiom. And so in this case, surface would be applicable. As the few women they can go in a group, they can travel with men. Age of the travelers. Well, the nationals, I'm told, will be in their 30s and 40s. Expats are going to be a little older. They're consultants. That would make sense. And then I learned something very interesting that I did not expect. Okay, follow me on this. People with less physical and mental strength and stamina available to make travel by surface benefit more from aviation than those who have more physical and mental strength and stamina. Okay, that's a mouthful, but what it means is the number of birthdays doesn't matter. Okay, age does not matter in terms of benefit of aircraft. What does matter is somebody's physical and mental strength and stamina. In other words, their hardiness. Are they hale and hardy? Think about a medevac patient. They have almost no physical and mental strength and stamina to travel by surface, and so they, of course, would benefit the most from aviation. Well, the same is true here. It's not age, it's hardiness. So on this variable, you need both air and surface. Children. In this case, there would be few or no children. And we know that we've learned that people traveling with children benefit more from aviation than those traveling without children. And we know all of the reasons why also. And we know this does not apply, which is helpful. Visitors or residents is another question that we need to know when thinking about a new program. The nationals would be residents. They would be living in their work locations. They were going to be from the towns and villages where they're going to be working. The expats would be visitors, of course. Aviation gives better access for visitors than surface transport. And again, we know the reasons why and a tremendous amount of data to back this up. So you're going to need both air and surface regarding this variable. Short-term workers, learned about this in Niger and in the Central African Republic. No, they're all going to be long-term people. We know that aviation facilitates access for short-term workers. But if your organization, to help accomplish its goal, if you're going to have short-term workers, make sure you've got aircraft available. And this doesn't apply, which is good to know. There are some people that have jobs that require them to travel in order for them to coordinate, administrate, and manage. In our scenario, the nationals, there'll just be a few of those. The expats will be trainers and consultants. We know that aviation enables more frequent access to work locations. So you want to, if you want to facilitate coordinating, administrating, and managing, use aviation to enable more frequent access. So on this variable, surface would probably be appropriate. Relationships en route or at destinations. This is another very interesting thing that came out of the research. I found that there's really two groups of workers. The vast majority are people who need to build, improve, and maintain relationships at the destination, at the work location, in the village. And there's a minority of workers who need to use the travel time and experience to do ministry, to build relationships. And so in our case here in Central Africa, they need to build relationships at the destinations. And we know one of the applicable axioms is that aviation enables more time with people at destinations. So air would be called for in this case. All right, so we're going through the requisite transport assessment, going through those applicable variables, who has to go where, how often, carrying what. And so now we're on the second of those, the where part. Local area travel. I understand that there will be some of these Bible translation projects will be in clusters. That is, that they're geographically close together, they're contiguous because of the similarities of the languages. Some projects will be out standing by themselves geographically. So aviation provides better access to locations that are far away, and surface transport provides better access to locations that are near. And so I was actually able to give definitions to far and near based on what the people told me. And in essence, near is anything that's a few hours or less, certainly less than 1 day. And so in this case, you're going to need, you can use surface transport, certainly for the cluster projects, and because there will be fewer single projects. Vehicles at destinations. Yep, they're going to need some motorbikes and some four-wheel drives. So having a vehicle available is often needed. That makes sense. So surface on this variable. Travel time. For the 10 projects I'm familiar with, about 6 of them you can get there in less than 1 day. Some of them you're going to take more than 1 day. Again, you have to respect the distances involved. And I learned, this was interesting too, in Cameroon and Niger, where I did the research, we found that in the road context, people are only willing to travel for 1 day by vehicle. Actually, it's less than that. It's 10 hours. And it's the 10 hours between 07 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. People do not want to be out on the road other than those hours in Africa. And that primarily is for security reasons. It's also for safety reasons, because if you've ever driven on the roads in Africa, you know that people will sleep on them. And also for practical reasons, because there's really no place to stay if you're traveling on a long journey. So you're going to need both air and surface with regard to this variable. Trip detriment, or also known as trip badness. My colleague who was there in January said that in terms of health, energy, safety, and security, the trip badness was shockingly bad at all levels. And having been to Africa many times myself, I can believe that. The worse the surface trip, the more aviation facilitates work overall. So this is actually a correlation. So the worse the surface trip, the more aviation facilitates work. So if you as a ministry leader want to facilitate more work overall, then you want to use aviation for people with the worst surface trips. And this helps us to know when, where, and for whom to use aviation. So obviously we'd want to use air with regard to trip detriment. High threat areas. In our scenario, based on our stipulations, for nationals, no. For expatriates, yes. Aviation isolates travelers from bad actors. Now, obviously we'd want to use air in this case. Now, just a point that if you made the decision to not use aviation for the expatriates, you can expect bad things to happen. You can expect people to get carjacked, raped, kidnapped, or killed. Travel restrictions. For our scenario, nationals no, expats yes. Aviation prevents kidnapping while traveling. People actually told me the most dangerous part of the trip is from their house to the airport. That's where the threat for kidnapping was. So you'd want to use air and surface. Hard places. This was one of my survey questions. And a hard place is some place that is particularly difficult or unpleasant to live or work in. And my colleague who was there in January in CAR said that the country is extremely hard place. The better people's attitudes are about hard places, the more work is advanced. And this is another correlation. And by the way, there's 122 correlations in the AER findings. So if you want to advance work more, use aviation to benefit people's attitudes about hard places. Now let me show you an example of a Waze table. This is actually the top 2/3 of a Waze table. I physically couldn't fit it on the screen. But there are 21 ways that aviation benefits attitudes about hard places. And remember, behind every one of these ways is a stack of data. They have all been induced from the data. And there will be 29 Waze tables on the AER website. So obviously, we would want to use AIR with regard to hard places. Hospitals. I am aware personally that there are 2 hospitals in CAR. There might be more. I know there is a mission hospital in Gambuwala, and there are other hospitals in Bangui. But we know that in an emergency, aviation is better for reaching destinations that are far. Surface is better for reaching destinations that are near. Again, same definitions for far and near, and this makes sense. If you can get to a hospital quicker by ground, that's the better mode of transport to use. But given the amount of real estate involved in CAR, air would be needed in this case for medical emergency transport. Okay, so again, we're working our way through the requisite transport assessment variables. Who has to go where, how often, carrying what. So let's get into the third category there. Length of stay. Well, I'm told that the translators will be staying out in their work locations for about 3 months. And this is another very interesting thing that took a long time to boil to the surface in the research, but it's really interesting. If a person's stay is shorter than the amount of time it takes to travel there and back by surface, people are less willing to make the trip. So think about it. If it takes you 2 days to get someplace and 2 days to get back, that's 4 days of travel, right? And if you're going to stay for less than 4 days, is it really going to be worth it? Are you really going to want to go? Probably not. Well, the missionaries on the field are the same way. So this is called the stay ratio, and it has to be greater than 1 to 1. But again, this helps us to know when, where, and for whom to use or not use aviation. So because they're staying for such a long length of time, surface would be appropriate. Number of trips per year. I'm told they would make 3 to 4 trips to the work location a year. Aviation is more beneficial for people who make many trips per year than it is for those who make few trips per year. And that would make sense. Now, interestingly, in the road context, people told me that they would be willing to take up to 6 trips per year. If you really pushed them, they'd be willing to take 6 trips per year. They don't want to take 6, but they will if they have to. And with 3 to 4 here in our scenario, surface would certainly be doable. Year-round access. Yes, they're going to want year-round access to keep Bible translation going, except for the rainy season from May to October, when the roads turn in that red laterite soil, turns into this red, slippery, really sticky mud. So we know that no air access results in work being seasonal. So if you choose not to use aviation, you are choosing to have the work only be seasonal. So air would be called for. All right, the last of the 4 sections of the requisite transport assessment, who has to go where, carrying what, is types of cargo. Well, our translators are going to be carrying just personal bags and small boxes. We know that surface transport enables the acquisition of large cargo, but they're not going to be building any houses. They're not going to be doing community development, that sort of thing. So they can use either air or surface. And what about the weight of the cargo? Well, it's going to be lightweight. It's going to be small in mass. We know that the amount of cargo acquirable depends on the relative capacities of the surface conveyance and aircraft involved. Now think about it for a minute. We know that that aircraft come in all different sizes. We know that vehicles and trucks come in all different sizes as well. So the amount of cargo you can get, it just depends on the relative capacities of the truck and the aircraft you've got available. And I'll show this to you in a graph a little bit later. Makes sense. So they can use either air or surface. All right, one more here. Need for resupply? Maybe, they might. We know the worse someone's surface trip, the greater the amount of cargo they can acquire by air. Again, this is another correlation that tells us about who to serve with air. And so you're going to need both. Okay, so let's see if we can begin to boil some of this down towards a knowledgeable decision. So right now, all those variables are probably flying around in your head looking something like this, right? Okay, well, let's see if we can make some sense of it. What if I took those variables and I organized them into the 6 that really where air would be called for, where air would be well used or is needed. We have 9 where both air and surface would be appropriate. We happen to have 6 where surface is needed and can be used. And of course, we have the 2 that don't apply. Okay, so when you look at it this way, the picture is starting to come a little more clear, isn't it? Okay, you're going to need some air, you're going to need some surface, you're going to need a combination of things. And that's part of what the requisite transport assessment is meant to help us figure out. All right, let's look at some additional material, some additional findings on aviation effectiveness, again, to help frame our decision, to figure out, is this a good idea to use aviation in CAR or not? Is this wise or is this stupid? But let's take a look at some more data. Okay, in this graph, this is time saved by aviation in the road context, we're talking Cameroon and Niger, per person per one-way trip. All right, so this tells us that the person would save 1.3 10-hour days or 13 hours. Okay, this is in the road context, 13 hours per person per one-way trip. Okay, that's nice to know, doesn't really strike you very much. Okay, but let's put it into the time saved calculator. You will have one on the IAMA website. It'll look something like this, but probably a whole lot better. And you will be able to enter the time saved per person one way. So let's use the conservative number of 1.3, double it for a round trip. We know that our people are going to take 3 to 4 trips per year. You can put in whatever number applies to your ministry area. You can put in, I'm told that there will be 42 travelers here in these projects. And when we make the machine do the math, we find that there are 1.8 work years saved every year. Okay, let this sink in. For these 42 workers, they are going to have an extra 3,822 hours every year to do Bible translation simply because they fly. All right? Extra 3,800 hours to do ministry because they flew, even in a road context. That's just amazing. Okay, so let's be conservative about it. Let's say only 30 of the workers are going to fly. You still get 1.3 extra work years every year. Or let's cut the number in half. Okay, you have 21 travelers. You still get an extra, basically another year of work years saved every single year. And these are conservative numbers. When you start talking about the river, trail, ocean contexts, these numbers get really, really huge in a hurry. Okay, let's look at some other data. So this one shows resources preserved by aviation. And we're talking about the resources of health, energy, safety, and security. These are resources that can either be spent on travel or they can be spent on people's work. So this is the percent of resources wasted when traveling by surface, but preserved by aviation. Okay. So in terms of physical health and psychological health, you can see a pretty respectable amount there. For physical energy and mental energy, in the low 70s is preserved by aviation. Safety for people and safety for cargo. Safety has to do with things getting broken, people being bloody, broken, or dead. Okay. Security. Security for cargo, security for personal items, and security against kidnapping. Okay, security has to do with things getting stolen, things getting taken from you. Up in the 90s. And overall, we can see that in the road context, that 78% of the health, energy, safety, and security is preserved because they use aviation, and they can use those resources on their work rather than on transport. All right, access. So the way that you would read this graph is with regard to access in the road context, aviation is better than surface transport and is so to an extent of 1.80 out of 4. So we can see that even in the road context, in terms of granting access to people's work locations, aviation is better than surface transport, and we can see the extent to which it is so. Now there will be at least 75 graphs or so on the AAR website. There will be 3 graphs for access in this case, and you'll be able to search and query those as you need to. Now, this graph looks kind of strange. What's going on here with cargo? Man, what's this? Well, with the amount acquirable, this has to do with that axiom that I mentioned earlier about the amount that you can acquire. It has to do with the relative capacities of the aircraft and vehicle involved. Now you have to remember, in road context, we're talking about Cameroon and Niger. We're talking about Cessna 182s, a 206, a Saloy 207, and an R44 at that time. And now if those flight programs were using Kodiaks or Grand Caravans, this graph would look different. Okay, fair enough. We accept that, and that's okay. Facilitation of work. This function has 6 sub-functions, and we can see overall that when it comes to facilitating work in the road context, aviation is better than surface transport and is to an extent of 1.14 out of 4. Emergency transport, no surprise here, 3.07 out of 4. And lastly, psychosocial benefit. This has to do with work relationships, family, psychological well-being, attitude about hard places, the organization's image, and the user's image. And we see here again that aviation is better than surface transport and is so to an extent of 1.36 out of 4. Okay. All right. So let's add to that the Strengths Maximization Index tool. So let me ask, what are aviation's inherent strengths? What does aviation do better than any other mode of transport? Well, it does 2 things. One, it saves time better than any other mode, and it preserves health, energy, safety, and security better than any other mode, except perhaps for the transporter room on the Starship Enterprise. So what I did was I went through all 1,300 pages of my findings, and I found the 25 variables that that talk about the inherent strengths of using aircraft. And this also came out of the requisite transport assessment. So the SMI tool is a reflection of the requisite transport assessment. So, and I was able, with the help of a friend and a colleague who is a math guy, computer guy, we were able to come up with a scale. And it's a very simple scale, but it certainly works. And then what I did was, for our demonstration, I put the two groups of travelers, the nationals and the expats, I put them through the SMI tool, and here's what I came up with. The nationals, their strength, their SMI index would be about a 3.3. And so we just kind of stop and we ask ourselves, does that make sense? From everything that we know about the nationals and their transportation situation, things in CIR, is moderate to minimal benefit, maximization of the aircraft? Yeah, that fits, okay? And what about for the expats, 6.5? Does that make sense? Does that fit from everything we know about the circumstances there? Yeah, it does. So this gives the decision maker just other pieces of information to make a knowledgeable decision with. And really, this comes down to stewardship, because not only are we stewarding the aviation assets that God has entrusted us with, we are also stewarding the people, the human resources that God has entrusted us with to put in our aircraft to facilitate their ministries. And so the SMI scale will directly give you an indication of your level of stewardship in using aircraft, not only for the sake of aircraft, but also to steward the human resources given to us. And since I know a lot of you guys are number guys, you're airplane guys, and so I've built a tool where we can very quickly and easily, with a couple of clicks of some buttons, bring this information into like a dashboard, if you will. And if you use the time saved calculator, that'll populate this instrument. The SMI tool will populate this instrument, and you can kind of get it all right there, kind of boiled down. All right, let's return to our initial question. So based on what you've learned in the last 50 minutes, what option would you choose? What do you think is a knowledgeable decision about an appropriate transportation solution to advanced Bible translation in the CIR? Okay, is it the same one that you picked 50 minutes ago, or is it different? All right, how confident are you that you're right? Remember, $3 million decision. And now, if your level of confidence has increased by, for every 10% that your level of confidence has increased, you are protecting 300,000 of the king's dollars. Because remember, this is a $3 million decision. And so if your level of confidence increases by 20%, you're protecting $600,000 from risk. Okay, and that gives you some idea of the value of the research. Okay, so let's wrap this up. I think all of us, we want to use aircraft effectively worldwide, and we really truly want to be good stewards of the aviation assets entrusted to us. And so we want to see people from every tribe, tongue, nation, and people standing around the throne of God, worshiping him and praising him, like it talks about in Revelation 7:9. So, and the AER will help us to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my presentation. I thank you very much for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. So with that, Glenn, I'll turn it back to you.
Hey, thank you, Scott. That it kind of rattles my mind to look at all those numbers. And I used to be a kind of a numbers guy, but if you can quantify it like that to help those people making those decisions, that's great. So we can see the benefit of it.
Okay.
So,
all right. Very good.
Right.
Thank you much again for this opportunity.
All right.